Welcome to Running in the 70s, where we interview, meet, and get to know athletes of all kind who were running in the 70s. I'm your host, Matthew Kleinowski. Today on the podcast, we're in North Carolina. We're with somebody who's got his own podcast with another famous runner, somebody who's used to talking and asking questions. Get to know today on the podcast somebody who had a great career all the way up through the marathon. Welcome, Mike Dunlap. Hi, Mike.
Hey, thanks, Matthew. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm just going to give you my background briefly, if I can, which I've been told I've never been able to do that. But in 1971, I was a freshman in high school and I went out for football. I was a farm kid. And lucky a kid up the road, 3 or 4 miles, invited me. He said, let's play ninth grade football together. As a ninth grader, my biggest fear in life was not being liked by anybody, being a loner, not having a friend in the world. My parents loved me. We all were brothers and sisters. We got along like brothers and sisters. But that peer group acceptance is so important to a young person. And so to be asked, hey, let's play football together. I said, you bet. I wasn't even sure. I knew what football was. I'd seen it on TV a few times. We suited up for practice a week before school started. And the workouts were brutal. They did that Hell Week thing back. They still do that, double workouts. And they basically weed out the kids who aren't really committed by overworking them that first couple of days. But then I survived that. I actually enjoyed that. I was a farm kid, and so hard work wasn't like a foreign concept. And loved football. I wasn't afraid. I told myself, don't be afraid. But here's what I didn't like about it. The coaches, and I'll not name names, you can never please them. It was a lot of yelling. And, maybe I'm over and, as a ninth grader, though, verbal abuse didn't work for me. Some people, that motivates you. They get you fired up and work harder. Or it just makes you feel inferior and never good enough. And I'm trying not to think of some of my, even my dad was a World War II vet, loving man, never laid a hand on us kids, but boy, could he tear you a new one. I never liked getting yelled at by my dad. And now I'm at high school getting yelled at by a coach. And I really didn't need that. I finished the football season and it was all right. I learned to tolerate it. But then this buddy of mine, the same guy, said, we're going to go out for track. And we'll do winter track in the wintertime. And winter track is just training during the off season. I didn't want to wrestle. I knew that. I wasn't any good at basketball, so I wasn't going to do that. So I really didn't have any winter sport. So we just work out, lift weights, and do a little running. And when I say running, we're talking a mile or two. Then he said, we'll do track in the spring. And again, I didn't know what track was. But here I was being invited by a friend to participate in a team sport. And I said, sure. Yeah. And he goes, it'll get us ready for football next year. And I thought, okay, fine. But I found out in track, I wasn't very fast. They figured that out the first day. They line up all the kids at maybe 100 yards on the football field. The track goes around the football field and they turn you loose. And the coach says, let's see who gets together in first. And my good friend was one of the first ones. He was a sprinter. I was in the middle of the pack, maybe towards the back. I beat most of the weight men, the discus and shot putters. I became a miler then. The first track meet, they throw you in, they just pick an event they think you might do well. And I got thrown in the mile. And I remember I ran a 5:26, which I've had people tell me that's really good as your first mile effort as a ninth grader. And other people say that's average, which I would assume it is. About my father was a World War II vet, was a really good man, hard worker. That guy worked 14 hours a day. He was a plumber. And we also ran a dairy farm. We grew up out in the farm and he'd go into town, work as a plumber 8 hours a day. But before work and after work, it was dairy work, which is like a prison sentence where you're going to be twice a day, 365 days a year. There's no getting around it. And so he made a great life for his kids. But he also, being a World War II vet and a child of the 30s, depression, his father and my mother's father, both alcoholics, my grandpa's, that was just a really tough time coming up. And I think emotionally, their fathers were absent from them. I never blamed my father. I think he was a great dad, but never wanted to show emotion, never to say, I love you, never give you a hug. That was not what men did to their boys because he never seen it. And so I think everybody wants that feeling of affirmation, of feeling accepted. I think peer group pressure works lots of bad ways. It also can work in a lot of good ways. I played football, didn't like getting yelled at by the coaches. Because that kind of reminded me almost at home. Not that my dad yelled all the time, but that was how he showed emotion. He let it build up. I think that World War II experience was hard on that generation, and that they never really learned how to deal with those emotions that were deep inside. He would never speak of the war because it must have been hell. And it was something he wasn't going to try to bring up back to the surface, but it was under there somewhere. And every now and then, I think a little of it got out through anger and that sort of thing. Anyway, when I went out for track, I ran the mile, ran 5:26, and my coach, I remember my first race was very noteworthy, but also very unpleasant. A mile, we all goes too fast the first lap. The second lap, you're really wondering, what have I got myself into here? By the third lap, you're just looking for a way out, and there isn't one. And by the fourth lap, you're just praying this will end soon. And I finally did. And like I said, I was bent over at the finish line. I didn't finish last. Our teenage egos, I didn't come close to winning, but I wasn't the last guy. You're looking for some glimmer of positive here. And I remember there are still people behind me. But my coach came up. His name is Gene Borman. He's still alive. He's retired, lives up by Yankton, South Dakota. Gene put his hand on the small of my back, bent over and quietly whispered, "You ran 5:26." And he showed me the clock. He had his own timepiece. He said, "That is really good for a freshman. You have potential." I might as well have just been told I won the lottery. To have an adult, a coach, a father figure, an authority figure come up and compliment you. Now, I didn't win the race, and I guess, according to him, I did well. The next week, he said, "Who wants to run the mile?" My hand went up. I wanted some more of that. I eventually got to 5:11. I wanted 5 minutes. That was the standard in high school in the early 70s. If you could break a 5-minute mile, wow, you're a decent runner. Didn't get there. I ran 5:11 3 times in a row. I think you could say, as an exercise physiologist, like I said, I hit my physiological ceiling. It was about that point at that time. But the training was archaic. It was basically, you run a mile out to the track. We'd run 400 meters as hard as you could, rest until you felt like you'd do it. And we'd do maybe 4 of those and run the mile back. I don't even know. It's not even race simulation because you'd run that quarter as hard as it was just getting used to feeling terrible. But anyway, I survived.
So let me ask you, where was it? When was it? What was on your feet? What were you running on? What was that track made of? And after we get all that kind of background stuff, what did your coach know about running
I love those
for
questions
distance
because,
runners?
yeah, it was in 1972, the spring of 72. It was in Lenox, South Dakota, a small town of about 2,000 people. We had the largest ninth grade class in the history of the school. We started with about 140. Now, we were the baby boom generation, all born in like 1956, 57. There was a bunch of us. And I think 119 of us ended up graduating. So we lost about 20 along the way. A lot of those were farm kids that really didn't see a reason in finishing high school. You could actually go on with your life and not have a high school degree back in the 60s, early 70s. Going to college was unusual. On my feet were probably some kind of tennis shoe, not a running shoe, but a canvas. I don't remember the model because it was probably bought at J.C. Penney. It seemed to get the job done. Nobody had anything better. There were some shoes just coming out from Adidas, and some of those I think were a little expensive, and so that wasn't an option. I was running on a cinder track, as everybody was in those days. There was no all-weather surface tracks in the early 70s, at least not where I was at, South Dakota.
Okay, about your coach, you described the workout, which is not going to win any awards
No,
for the most
it-
effective mile run workout. But what did he know? And did you have a full track team with that small school?
yes, we did have a full track team. We had some good farm athletes. That's the thing. I think some athletes coming off the farm are just natural. They do weight work, they do endurance work because they're walking, they're biking, they're running, they're doing what they have to do as part of their life. The coach, motivation, good guy. He was a quasi runner himself. Gene may hear this someday. He was mostly like student manager for the football and basketball team. He was a small guy. And that's why he gravitated toward running, but never really attained any significant success at it. He was a biology teacher. And as far as his coaching expertise, he must have went to a few workshops, so maybe just talking to other coaches, following what everybody else maybe was. Nobody really knew what they were doing. Very few did. So that was a little frustrating because you thought there had to be a better way, but we didn't know as a kid. So I survived track and I decided to go out for cross country. Now, I had never heard of cross country until I was running track because some of my track mates, one kid in particular, Laurent Clock, he was our best runner. He ran about a 4:38 mile then that his senior year, which is, pretty decent mile. He ran cross country. And so they told me about cross country. You run on a golf course and parks. The distance in South Dakota at that time was 2.2 miles, which just sounds like where did they come up with that? Somebody measured the course for the state meet and it ended up being 2.2 miles. And so they just made that the standard cross country distance for everybody. Now it's 5K or what have you. So after the experience of my ninth grade year of getting yelled at constantly, I went up to Gene Borman after track. I said, Coach Borman, I think I'm going to go out for cross country next fall. I'd like to remind him of this occasionally. He goes, Mike, that's fine if you want to do that. But he goes, I've seen you play football. He said, you're not bad. He said, I was always too small to play football. You're not. You're still growing. And he goes, if I was you, I'd play football. He tried to talk me out of it. I said, I appreciate that, coach. Yeah, but he wasn't telling me. He said, oh, if you want to, that's up to you. He just wanted to make sure I weighed my options here. Because I don't know if he thought I had much of a future as a runner. Could you imagine? I was about 126 pounds, 5'9", 5'10", about when I stayed throughout high school. I don't think I had much of a career in college, post high school, whatever. And so I said, I think I'm going to do cross country. He goes, do what you want. Just serendipitously, I happened to open up the Sioux Falls Argus Leader, big newspaper in southeastern South Dakota. South Dakota State University, their coach, Jay Dirksen, he was their head cross country and track coach. Jay was an outstanding runner in college, an All American. He ran a 2:21 marathon in 1969. He was one of those elite. If you're running down around 2:20, he was at the caliber. He was thinking Olympic trials. Ron Dawes from Minnesota had ridden, was a self-made Olympian, had made the Olympic team in 1968. And I think a lot of Midwestern runners looked at Ron Dawes and said, wow, if he can do it, I can do it. And Jay was a runner's runner. He loved running. He understood running. He was a student of running. He was an Arthur Lydiard disciple. And he was hosting a cross country camp for high school kids. $90 for 1 week, room and board and coaching. Now, 1972, that probably was like $900 to my folks. I don't remember. In today's dollars, that's like a dinner for two. And anyway, I asked him, I said, could I go? My folks never once ever discouraged me from running. They never encouraged me. They never said, gee, you need to get out and do some training. They just said, if you'd like to do it, yes, we'll pay for that. Wow. I was just blown out of the water. I went up to this camp that summer. It was in August, hotter than blazes. We stayed in dormitories. There were 13 boys and 1 girl had all paid their dues. And there was outstanding coaches, some of the greatest coaches in the state of South Dakota, the history of the state. Jay had recruited them to come up. Probably they volunteered because they just loved athletes, loved young people. And for a week, we immersed ourselves in running and learning about running. It was a life-changing event for me. These men just not only preached running, they lived it. They were all runners themselves. I ran into a group of businessmen in Brookings, South Dakota, where South Dakota State University is. They had taken up this running. They called it jogging back in the 60s. It took off. And I think it was Bill Dillinger out in Oregon really helped get this concept of you're never too old to run, to jog, if you would. And there was a group of businessmen. These guys were old. They had to be in their 40s. When you're a teenager, 40-year-olds look like they're geriatric. These guys would come and run with us on their lunch break or after. We'd run in the evening. And believe it or not, Matthew, Jay Dirksen had us running 4 times a day, 5 miles in the morning, like 6:30, 5 miles before lunch, like at 11, 5 miles after the afternoon sessions, about 4, and then we'd go out for another 5 at about 7:30, right before sunset. It was abusive. We didn't know any better in 1972. I never got blistered. I was running in those canvas shoes. I never felt so bad and had such a good time all at the same time. How's that sound?
Let me just ask you, when did it become that you took on the identity of I am a runner?
That's a great question. Before I went to that camp, I saw an article. The Sunday paper had an insert called The Parade. I don't even know what it was, a national syndicated like magazine, but it was a paper.
It came out in Pennsylvania, so it was
And
all
in
over
the
country.
early 70s, guess who they did a profile on? Steve Prefontaine. They had a pictorial and an article about this young, phenomenal runner from Oregon named Steve Prefontaine. I was fishing up at a lake, and we were looking at the Sunday paper. My dad loved to go fishing. After running track that spring, I ran this article about this young guy named Steve Prefontaine, and it captivated me. It talked about he wasn't your typical runner, introverted, skinny, geeky little guy he was more aggressive. He was a fighter, pure guts. theory was if somebody's going to beat me, they're going to taste blood if they beat me. Those kind of attitude. And you go, wow, this guy is a badass and he's a runner and he was a role model. Maybe we attracted to the bad boy because as a teenage boy, you want to be considered dangerous or something. But then, okay, we go off to the running camp and guess what was going on? The Munich Olympics were going on and we watched Prefontaine. We watched Frank Shorter win the Olympic gold medal. We were there. We'd stay up and watch the 10,000 meters when Lassie Viren fell, got up and still broke the world record. We saw this happening on TV on black and white. I left that running camp. I was a runner. I wasn't sure going into it. I wanted to be. It made me a runner. And that 1 week is probably pivotal in my life.
What about the drive of competition? Now
Oh,
you're a runner. How did competitiveness fit in your self view of being a runner?
and I hate to say this sounds like a negative comment. I saw a lot of my self-worth as wrapped up in my running, which is dangerous. You're more than a runner. Everybody's unique, one of a kind. Love yourself. If you don't, nobody else is going to. But unfortunately, as a teenage boy, you really saw your ego, your place in the world is how am I looked at by others, which isn't, I don't think, very healthy, but we don't really know any better at that point. At the end of the running camp, after running us for 20 miles a day for 4 or 5 days in a row, we had a race. The morning of the last Saturday, we had a 3-mile race out at the golf course. And the one girl who was at the camp, her name was Jane Whiff. You can look this one up. WIPF. I don't know that's her maiden name. She went on to become a 2:36 marathoner later in her life. Jane was the most cute, blonde hair, just a beautiful girl from Fremont, South Dakota. We all had a crush on her. She was the only girl at the camp. She had to stay in a dormitory by herself. Rich Greeno, who was just a loving, wonderful coach, a well-known coach, he'd be the only one allowed to go over and get her out because back in the day there was no Me Too movement, but they were sure that her privacy was respected and all that sort of thing. Jane beat me. Jane beat me in that race. Now, as a 14-year-old boy, 15-year-old boy, to get beat by a girl really dents your ego. But the minute we finished, I ran as hard as I could. Everybody did. Pats on the back, high fives, nice job, way to go. You did well. Nobody said, "Oh, you got beat by a girl." Geez, you know what? Now, maybe I'm looking back with rose-colored glasses, but I didn't feel I had my ego was dented. Nobody else seemed to care. Nobody else seemed to be bothered by it. Just it happened, but it didn't motivate me to train harder. So I took the principles we learned, and it was so simple, Matthew. Hard, easy principle. They really drummed that into us. If you're going to run hard one day, you got to go easy. Doesn't mean you don't run the next day, but you run easy, comfortable. And I took that to heart. And it's not that complicated. The other thing I always remember from that camp, make haste slowly. Patience. Patience is a virtue. You're not going to become a successful runner in a week, in a month, or probably even in a year. I've looked back. My personal best in running came 12 years, pretty much by PR and stuff in the marathon, because you're going to peak later in the marathon. My PRs in track actually were approximately 8 to 10 years after I started running. That's a long-term view. It's almost like investing. If you want to be a millionaire and retire with $1 million, you better start in your 20s. And it's not that bad if you stay at it and you're consistent. And they drove that home to us. Came back to high school, was second man on our cross country team. Laurent could never beat him. We dueled. I'm a sophomore, he's a senior, and I tried to beat Laurent, and he didn't want to get beat by a sophomore. And we made each other better. Steel sharpens steel. We'd work out together. We'd race together. We loved each other, but I wanted to beat him and he didn't want me to beat him. And I never did, but it kept pushing me on. I finished 58th at the state cross country meet. My first attempt, there's probably 100 runners. I thought that's not great, but it's not, I'm in the middle of the pack. Ran cross track in the spring. It was uneventful weather, crappy tracks, South Dakota wind. Went back to the running camp for the second year in a row, 1973. They cut it back to 3 runs a day. I think some of the coaches had a talk with Jay and said, "We're going to kill some poor kid up here. If we have a lawsuit." And so they cut it back to 3 runs a day. And we had about 15, 20 kids. Just loved camp. It was like, I look forward to that. Came out of it, won a few cross country races. Thought I'd finish in the top 10 as a junior. I got 20th as a junior. I went from 58th to 20th. But I thought I should be in the top 10 because my performances up to then indicated that. Had a bad day at the state meet. You talk about disappointing. When you set goals and you don't hit them, there's 2 options, give up or work harder. And obviously the option I took is really frustrated me. Back to track that junior year, again, uneventful. terrible weather. I think we had one all weather track now, which was basically an asphalt surface with no cushioning whatsoever. Your track spikes would be worn down to nubs if you ran on that thing with track spikes. Anyway, went back to the camp for my third year in a row. And again, a pivotal moment. I'm now a veteran of this camp. And we were out running with some of the coaches, and Russ Strandy, a coach from Brookings High School, he was there every year. And we were talking about the upcoming cross country season. And we were talking about, gee, who's going to win the class double A? I was a class A. They had three classes of schools. And so we were doing the preseason. Who do you think's going to do well? What teams? Blah, blah, blah. And we got to class A, my group. And I said, yeah, Russ, I don't know. I said, who do you think is going to be one of the best runners? And he looked me just in the eye like you are right now, Matthew. And he said, Mike, I think you have a great chance, be the state champion. And you could have hit me with a feather. I wanted that, but I never would say those words, and I never had anybody speak them to me. Have you ever heard that words are a powerful thing? You must, because you're doing this podcast, because they are powerful. That went right into my heart, into my brain, and I won the state cross country meet in my senior year. And I'm not bragging; it was a lot of work. If I had to talk to young people now, and I would love that, I would tell them what's the keys to success, all those things I talked about, patience and all this. But you know what the real thing is? You need to embrace discomfort. To run fast is painful, and you need to get used to that. Physiologically, we learn how to buffer the lactate, the hydrogen ions that are produced through inefficient ATP and all this, the Krebs cycle. It's all this technical mumbo jumbo. Yeah, it hurts to cause your.
It's pain. It's pain.
I taught myself and I told myself this: embrace it. Embrace it. Now, I don't like pain. I'm not a masochist. I don't stick needles to myself for that to elicit pain. But it's that pain is temporary, pride's forever sort of motto I've seen on t-shirts. If you want the reward at the end, you have to pay the price. If you want to have a good salary as a career, you're probably going to have to get a college degree, maybe a master's, maybe a doctorate. Those kind of individuals make a good living. And if that's your goal in life is to make a good living, there's some things you have to do to get to that point. Where if you want to be the best runner you can be, that's one of the things you're going to have to do is learn to embrace discomfort. Pain is a word you hate to use it, but it is. Racing is probably the most painful thing there is. I love George Sheehan. I'm sure you've heard of Dr. George Sheehan. He's a cardiologist, running philosopher. And he talked about every time he goes out for a run, it's like he's taking a hammer and a chisel and you're turning yourself into that beautiful work of art, like Michelangelo's David. But there's labor, there's effort, there's discomfort, but you're refining. It's all the slag that you burn off when you refine gold. You got to get rid of all that. And it's going to be a lifelong endeavor. We're never, we're never going to be perfect. But if you can get that mindset of saying, I'm going to do what it takes. Graduated high school, and Jay Dirksen, of course, sent me a nice letter. There was no doubt where I wanted to go to college, South Dakota State University. I went up there on a partial scholarship, and a couple other state champions, Mike and Mark Bills, they were double a division above me. They went there. So I wanted to run with the best. I figured if you want to get better, play somebody who's better than you. Ping pong, golf, whatever, bowling, you want to improve. If you beat people, if you only play people you can beat, what's the motivation? It's not stimulating you.
That brings up an idea on competition. There's a difference between being competitive and wanting to win.
Hmm.
Is that something that's a difference for you?
I wanted to win, but I realized you can only do your best. You can't control anybody but yourself. And so I've seen kids who, finish second at the state cross country meet are devastated, are disappointed. Did you give your best effort? Did you give 100%? Yes. Then keep your head up. Go congratulate that other guy who was able to take it up maybe a notch above you. Now, is that
Well, that's of course, Mike. That's easy to say. When
yeah.
you've just lost and you wanted
Oh,
to
you're
finish
gonna
10th and you finished 20th, not necessarily the first thing you want to do until you've matured a bit is shake somebody's hand and say, "Way to go for beating my butt." Of course, yeah, it's a process. Let me ask you about your personal progression. You
yeah.
became a runner through your experience at the camp. What about psychologically? You're maturing in race tactics. By the time you reach your university, your coaching, as you described in your freshman year, was not very sophisticated.
No.
You worked with lots of good coaches. You got your own ideas.
Correct.
How about your development there preparing to go to a big school or university.
That's excellent.
What had you learned in terms of tactics, and how had you changed over high school?
You bet. In fact, just to bring the high school to an end, Gene Borman and I went to the Junior Olympics in Dickinson, North Dakota, the summer between my juniors. I had qualified to go to the regional Junior Olympics. I ran a 4:32 mile as a junior. And so we went up there, and the ride home was like 5, 6 hours. And I got a yellow notepad out. He was driving, and we wrote the cross country workouts for that coming fall together. He said, Mike, you've been to this camp now 3 years in a row. What are some of your ideas? And I really appreciate, and that he was an adult. I'm a kid still. He's give me what you think we should be doing. And together we wrote the workouts. He tells me to this day, he has shared those workouts with several other coaches, and they're still being used to this day. And I'm not saying I'm going to take any credit for that, but together we formed a really successful. We had a we won every cross country meet we ran in as a team until the state meet. We got beat by a team off the reservation in South Dakota named Todd County. It's from, I can't remember which reservation. The reservation, the Eagle Butte, Cheyenne Eagle Butte. I'm going to leave out some of the reservations there. They have some fantastic athletes. Billy Mills came off of the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. And these Native American kids, they remind me of African kids. They grow up with nothing except the joy of movement, of basketball, of activities, of sports. And we would never see them during the season. We didn't go to their meets. They didn't come to our meets. So all the way up to the state meet, you get thrown up against people you'd never run against. And Todd County, to their credit, we finished second to them, and they ran outstanding. Going back to the things you learn, Jay Dirksen, he was my coach my first 2 years of college. The workouts were handed to us on day one of the cross country season. And on day one, we knew what we were doing every day for that season. Now, in between seasons, it was pretty much easy running. He really discouraged us from racing in the summer because we're going to do enough of that in the fall and in the spring. He just wanted us doing base miles. The day I finished high school, I went out for a run the next day. The state meet ended. I was now, in my mind, a college runner. I went out and I did a 10-mile run. No more 5-mile runs, 10-mile runs. I pretty much ran 10 miles a day that whole summer. And Jay was a great motivator. He would put together a newsletter. He gave us all postage cards at the beginning of the summer, self-addressed, stamped. You'd write every day your miles and send it in. 1 week later, you got a newsletter in the mail, showed everybody's miles for that week. And if you happen to jump into a road race, he said, go ahead, just run through it. You're not there to prove anything, but if you want, you put your results down so you could read what your teammates had done every week. You'd look forward to that newsletter. I wish I would have kept them. It was such a motivation because if you didn't run that week, because some kids just, I got busy, my girlfriend, guess what, bud? You had to put down that. Now you could lie. Really? That never even crossed my mind. But, it motivated the whole team. Cross country championships are won in the summer. You've heard that. And we really took that to heart. So when we came to the season, we were ready for those workouts. And it was a standard protocol that I followed all through my career. Let's start on Sundays and long run. And that was a 20-miler. Jay had us in college because he was a marathoner. We were doing 20-mile runs every Sunday in cross country. Very relaxed pace. Run with those businessmen from downtown. We'd start. Sometimes we couldn't run that. It would be 7 to 8 minute miles. And us young guys, we just have to pick it up. After about 10 miles, we couldn't take it. We had to break loose and maybe pick it up to 6:30 pace or something. Monday was a recovery day because you just did a 20-miler on. This is the pattern I followed for 16 years. Was a recovery day, which meant an easy 2.5-mile run to a park. We do 8 200-meter strides and a 2.5-mile run back of 5. Now, every one of the weekdays started off with a 5-mile run in the morning. That was just a group run, totally relaxed, totally aerobic, no pushing of the pace because that was coming later. Tuesday night was the hard night, mile repeats. We'd work our way up to 5 1-mile repeats. We'd start with 5, then we'd go to 4, then we'd go to 3 as the season went on. So that last week before the conference meet, we did 2 1-mile repeats. You go 5 minutes of recovery between each one of these. And that was a hard workout. Mile repeats are brutal. You could probably get just as much physiological benefit out of 1,000 meters, about a 3-minute effort. These are more like 5-minute efforts. And I think that extra 2 minutes was really for this thing up here. 2 more minutes of discomfort, of dealing with pain. I don't know physiologically if you really gain much from 3 to 5 minutes at that kind of effort. But anyway, Wednesday was total recovery. Thursday was fartlek or hills. We did a workout called Killer Hill. It was this 800-meter hill, loose dirt. Remind me of Percy Soretti when he took Herb Elliott to the sand dunes out in Australia, make him run up them damn sand dunes barefoot. We didn't have that. We had dirt and we wore shoes, but it was very strength oriented because of the loose surface. He'd pair us up and matched us with athletes of our equal ability. You'd feed off each other. We'd go up two at a time. If that guy got a half a step on me, what did I want? To get that half a step back and get a half a step on him. And it wasn't a race, it was a workout, but he knew how to make it. It was a 5 mile run. It was like 6 miles of up and down and five. It was like a 16 mile workout. Friday was what we called a donut run. I don't know if you ever did those, Matthew. Back in the day, we always thought carbohydrate loading was so important. It was more of just an excuse. On Friday, because we usually had a race on Saturday, we'd run 2 to 2.5 miles to the local bakery. The freshmen had to buy for the first time. That was part of the orientation, the hazing. Now you could buy a donut for 15 cents back in those days. So if you had $1, you could basically pay for the whole team. And somebody always had 50 cents, a buck, and we'd all get a donut. And we'd sit there at the bakery and eat the damn donut. And then we'd turn around and have to run the 2 days. And it was supposed to just to keep it totally relaxed, aerobic. And then we'd race on Saturday. And that was the pattern for 4 years of cross country. I really with you more about cross country because track in the South Dakotas was horrendous. We had no indoor facilities to speak of. Trying to do track workouts under icy, cold conditions, I broke down pretty much 4 out of 5 track seasons. Stress fractures, surgery, tendonitis. It was really tough to train in South Dakota outdoors. We had an indoor season, which Jay loved to win everything. And we tried to train hard for indoor, race hard indoor. Track doesn't have a lot of good memories for me. Cross country does. Maybe it was the softer surfaces and the warmer weather. It was easier to remain healthy, where chronic overuse injuries really decimated us. And I think it was the cold and icy conditions.
Let me ask you about the university scholarship.
Yeah, I got my room paid for, which was nice. Unfortunately, timing is everything. Mike and Mark Bills were state champions in the class AA. They both received full scholarships. And as a track coach, Jay explained it to me. He said, Mike, I can't just recruit distance runners. I have to also recruit sprinters and hurdlers and throwers and shot putters and discus throwers and all this. And we're Division 2A, which had, I forget how many scholarships. And so he said, look, I can give you a room. He gave me a room. And because of my father's health, I didn't get into this. My father had bypass surgery in 1972. As I was just starting high school, he had coronary artery disease, survived the surgery, which was Stone Age in those days, and lived 12 more years. Unfortunately, they put him on disability. In 1972, if you had a heart attack, you were put out, as he said, to pasture. He received Social Security starting at age 46. So did I, as a dependent of some. I never saw the checks. My parents needed them to live on, but I also qualified for some good financial aid because my parents obviously living off Social Security and this milk check that was coming in. I always remember, Matthew, my first day at college, I woke up that morning and I rolled over in my bunk bed and thought, I don't have to go out and milk cows today. First time in my life. And I felt good for me, but then I thought about my mother, my younger brother, and my father. They were still there doing it. And it really was bittersweet. Let me tell you, I was happy not to have to do it because there was a bit of drudgery involved. But at the same time, there's a sense of responsibility and that sort of thing. Lucky for them, they sold out the dairy business in the late 70s before the bottom really fell out of the dairy industry.
Let me ask you a few more questions then.
Sure.
Just to get the background, people get to know you. What kind of student were you in high school and then
Average.
in college?
B, I did not care for school. I was smart enough to get by without having to apply myself. I wish I could tell you I put the same kind of effort into my studies that I put into my running. No, I didn't. I got more satisfaction and reward from my athletics than I did I was a 3.0 all through high school, all through college. I did go back to graduate school and 2 years after I graduated, and I got a 3.93 because school meant a lot more to me in grad school because now I had a family and I was there because I wanted to be there. Average student, smart enough to get good grades without having to apply myself. I really didn't want to have a degree other than I had to pick one. I picked physical education because I thought I like sports and coaching, doing sports. What a great job. And really to get paid to help kids to come up in that environment. Lucky I got mixed up with a program, cardiac rehab in grad school. It was the first program in the state of South Dakota in 1982. I fell in love with the theory, probably because of my dad's heart issues. That's how I went into then became an master's in exercise phys. And that was set my career off into medicine. rather than teaching.
Let me find out about South Dakota State
Oh,
University
yeah.
in terms of how sophisticated was the program? Equipment, what facilities, what did you have good equipment?
We
Did you have
did.
more
We
than one
did.
set of spikes? And how is the quality of the coaching
The
there?
coaching was outstanding. Jay Dirksen was my coach my first 2 years. He then got recruited and left to go to Illinois to coach at a Division I school. They hired a former SDSU runner, Scott Underwood. I knew Scott from when he was at South Dakota State and he did his graduate work there. He was at the camp one year getting his master's. And Scott was that much older than us. When we were 20, 21, he was like 26, 27. He meshed right in because he came from the system we were in. So it was an easy transition to have Scott come in as a coach. They did develop an indoor facility that was not the ideal indoor facility. Can you picture a 200-meter track shaped like a D, like the capital letter D? Do you see there's a nice round curve, and then all at once you come to a 90-degree corner, a straightaway, then another 90-degree corner. That was our indoor facility. In those 90-degree corners, we would try to race and do track interval work on them. Did a lot of damage. Tendonitis, Achilles issues. I once did a workout. I'm going to brag, Matt. Me and another runner, I was in really great shape. We did what's called 70-90s. You run a 70-second 400 meters. Okay. And then a 90-second 400 meters, 6-minute pace, 5:20 pace, say, for 1/4 mile. We did 6 miles of that on that indoor track. You start feeling the fatigue. And I really appreciate this. Like Jacob Ingebrigtsen and these famous runners now that are world class guys, they do lactate testing. He'll stop after an interval and poke him in the ear, look at it and go, "You're done. You're done. You're developing more lactate at this point than your body can process. So now we're going to be doing more damage than good. Your fatigue's going to put you at higher." We ran because the workout said you're doing 6 miles. You did 6 miles. And I know off of that, I tore like oh, I can't remember the fascia in your IT band, FTA, fascia tendons. That took me out for a season. And so you did training errors like that, which were, it was too much. Some guys survived it and very few of us did. The universities, like at South Dakota State, have a brand new field house with a 300-meter oval inside. So, and the cushioning, the shoes they're wearing now, we could spend a whole episode talking about super shoes. We've old school guys from the 70s are lucky to have those waffle trainers that are on the photo there behind you. I had the first pair in 1975 at South Dakota State. I walked across campus with those red waffle trainers on. Kids would stop me and say, "Hey, excuse me, buddy, where did you get those shoes?" Because they were like eye catching. And I'd show them the waffle. It was Bill Bowerman's waffle machine. He was making these things out of this burning rubber. I heard he poisoned himself with the adhesive glue that he was using. Anyway, and so people wanted them. They were like that. It was trendy and stuff. I wish I would have kept those shoes. They were so hammered out. I ran, trained in those. It was, and Matthew, I'm laughing because I go down rabbit holes, but about 500 to 700 miles on a pair of shoes nowadays? Is that what they recommend? Then the EVA, the vinyl acetate, it compresses and you lose. We ran those red waffle trainers. I think I had those for 2 years. I ran all my miles in them. I ran 2 marathons with those shoes on. The uppers basically disintegrated. We kept shoe gluing them. If you're old enough to remember what shoe glue was, it's a glue you'd put on the heel to try to build it up because wore the black rubber down into the midsole. And you're wondering why we got injured. How did we get injured? We didn't know any better.
There's a lot of parallels. I'm sure a lot of people are going to be able to relate
Sure.
and parallel to a lot of your experiences. Let's talk about your career
Hmm.
in
Talk about
university. What was your best accomplishment?
I set the school record for 10,000 meters. It was 30:29. I had that for a few years. Now I'm not in the top 10 anymore. I ran a 3:54, 1,500 meters. That's about a 4:12 mile and won a big race. It's called the Howard Wood Dakota Relays. I lettered all 4 years in cross country. Our cross country team as a team finished ninth when we were freshmen, fifth as sophomores, second as juniors, second again as seniors. So we we're a national Division II runner up 2 years in a row. Those are great, but the work, the friendships, the teammates, Dick Beardsley, as we'll get to him now, he came to our team as a junior college transfer in 1978, my senior year. And Dick and I were kindred spirits. The team met him before I did. I was team captain and I had a girlfriend and they had a little team get together at a lake. And I was late getting there because I was with my girlfriend. And he had to go back because his scholarship was to be a resident assistant at one of the dorms. He had some responsibilities there. And they go, Mike, you just missed Beardsley. And they said, you're going to love him. He's just like you. What? And we get mistaken for brothers quite a bit. We got big noses and I get passionate and a little effervescent or whatever, excitable about talking running. And he does, and then some. And he's made a career. He's a motivational speaker now. If you can listen to our podcast, we talk about our careers. And he came from nothing. He didn't run until he was 17 years old. He never made it to a state track or high school track or cross country meet in Minnesota in his life. Never recruited at all. Went to a junior college to go into dairy science because he liked dairy like I did. And he happened to have a cross country program and track program. And he did run in high school his junior and senior year, and he enjoyed the sport. So he thought, well, heck, they got a team at this junior college. And he progressed there, came to South Dakota State and really blossomed when he had this structure and a group of runners around him that had the same motivation he did. You know, you can go to On the Run with Beards and Dunn. Here's our podcast. And I'll just leave it at that because he has the Guinness Book of World Records for consecutive marathon PRs. His first marathon was a 2:47 at Pavo Nurmi Marathon over in Hurley, Wisconsin. And he eventually ran 2:09:36 at the Grandma's Marathon in Duluth, Minnesota from like 1977 to 1981. That's a 4-year period. His marathon went from a 2:47 to a 2:09. And every race in between was faster than the one before, which is just really amazing to think about it. A wonderful, fantastic career, fantastic individual. And I've been so blessed in my life to have come into contact with people like him, my teammates, my coaches. Just to share with you, Matthew, I'm flying back to South Dakota this Thursday. Our South Dakota State's hosting what's called the Summit Conference. It's the conference, they're a Division I school now. And they're hosting the cross country championship at their home meet. Me and probably about 100 and plus other alumni are all going to show up there. We're having an alumni get together Friday night. We'll all be at the race Saturday supporting South Dakota State University men's and women's team. Then there'll be a post-race social somewhere. And I am looking so much forward to this because I'm going to see teammates from 30, 40 years ago that we've maybe kept in somewhat contact through Facebook and what have you. But now it's nothing like get together and getting to do the face-to-face. And so those kind of relationships, when people talk about why running, what are the benefits of running? We haven't even touched upon the health benefits. I could spend hours on as a physiologist.
Yeah, that kind of stuff's probably where people want to listen to your podcast. So we're
Yeah.
discussing the history and the life
Oh,
cycle and how that went here. That's okay. Yeah, I'm sure we could go for
oh,
hours. Trying to focus maybe and talk about your transition out of running. You ran marathons for several years. Did you train with Beardsley for
oh
your
yeah.
marathons?
Yep.
Okay.
We were so fortunate and we talked about it on our podcast. He opened a lot of doors for me. I went down to Houston in 1981 to run the marathon and he was invited. I stayed with him. The race director said, Mike, I was a 2:20 marathoner at that time, which was decent, but he said, we can't afford to pay your airfare and all that. He goes, if you can get here, you got a free entry into the race. You can have a free entry. And I thought, okay. Dick said, Mike, you stay with me. I have a free hotel. They'll put me up. You can bunk in. He did that in college a lot. And so I got myself down there and Dick got second. I ended up seventh. And that opened up doors for me. I got hooked up with the Brooks Shoe Company after that. I ran 2:19. And then I got invited to be on the Brooks racing team from 2082 to 84. And Dick and I stayed together at the Grandma's Marathon in 1982. He won it. I got 10th. We went to Thunder Bay, Canada together. Yeah, to have him, he was my best friend. I wanted to beat him so bad, and he did not want me to ever beat him. But we love each other. That's what I don't know. That's what competition's all about: is using each other to improve each other. And I have no ill will against anyone who beats me, unless they use some cheating of some kind, performance enhancing drugs. That just doesn't sit well. Jay Dirksen always said when we did this running camp, we had routes. He'd tell us where to run, and it was easy to look and say, if we cut through here, it would cut a half a mile off. And his attitude was, why in your world would you want to cut your workout short? That's hurting no one but you. That mindset of why would you cheat yourself, let alone cheat anyone else? True. It's character. And that's hopefully what sports all about, is building character and fair play, the courage to lose and the courage to win.
let's go there then for a wrapping on this is how did you transition
Yeah,
out psychologically
it was
from
brutal.
when you let me frame it for you what a lot of people I know are interested to hear. How did you transition out psychologically when you saw the end of your best running days? And then if you came to the end of being an elite performance athlete, leaving the Brooks team, and then the end of competitive running?
Yep. It was hard because, like I said, I think I still, and my wife says to this day, I think I still see a lot of my self worth wrapped up in your performance, which again is, I probably should get some counseling on that. When you enter the 30s, you're not as good as you used to be. Your intervals times, your 5K times, or whatever. And the injuries, it seemed like it was always a nagging injury, working full time, having a family. And it was like burning the candle on both ends. And so eventually something had to give, and it was the training. I qualified for the 80 Olympic trials. I qualified for the 84 Olympic trials, but was injured for the 80 and I had mononucleosis in 84. So I missed those two.
Wow.
I wanted to try one more time in 88, and I was trying to do it off of memory. I was running maybe 70 to 80 miles a week, where I used to do 100 miles a week. I was hoping that by running harder, I could compensate for the lack of quantity. I went to Napa Valley, California, and went out at 2:09 for the first half and fell apart and ran 25. I'm proud that I still finished with that time in 1988, which you had to break 2:20 to even get a chance to go. And I think you had to break 2:19 or 18 to get in an expense paid trip. Anyway, and so that fell by the wayside. I kept running in 89, 90, and 91. Injuries. Finally, I ran a race in 1991, St. Patrick's Day, Matthew, and it was a half marathon in Dickinson, North Dakota, where I happened to be living. And this sounds so terrible. I won the race and I was disappointed. I ran an hour and 15. That's a 2:30 marathon pace. And I thought, I'm never going to break 2:20 again. And my knee was killing me. I've had 4 knee surgeries. I had 3 up until that time. And my knee pain I quit after that race. I never ran again. I sat around and felt sorry for myself for about a month, depressed. It's the endorphins, the oxytocin, the dopamine, the serotonin, all those good hormones. I wasn't getting it like I had been for 20 years. I started in 71. It's 1991. It had been a 20-year run of pretty much, lucky for me, good friend of mine, Kerry Gress, Gress, he was a triathlete and he used to do long runs with me, training for a triathlon. He caught up with me one day. He goes, Mike, what's been going on? I haven't seen you around. My knee hurts. I can't run. I don't know. I'm getting fat. And he was a Marine, Special Forces, and a rodeo bull rider. He's not a guy to trifle with, friendliest guy in the world, but he cut to the chase and said, you need to quit feeling sorry for yourself, get a bike and come bike with me. He was right. I couldn't sit around and this is my life from now on, being depressed. I bought $100 Schwinn and went for a bike ride. And within 2 or 3 bike rides, I got those endorphins, serotonin, all those feelings came back. And mostly it's that feeling of satisfaction. Every run, every bike ride I finish now, nobody knows. Nobody cares. Well, Strava now, everybody knows. That feeling came back. My knee pain went away. I was hooked. I went from running to cycling like that. And I've never looked back. People go, don't you run a little bit? I can't. It's bone on bone. I'm just so blessed that for some reason, the cycling motion doesn't bother my knee. Climbing stairs. Yeah, I can't. Yeah, I notice those things. I can bicycle. My wife and I just got done with a 36-mile bike ride. I bike daily. I got obsessed with cycling like I did with running. I did 24-hour races. I did a bike race across the state of South Dakota called the Gut Check, 412 miles. Did it in 19 hours and 40 minutes. It's about 21 miles an hour. I got beat by a guy from Minneapolis. Okay, good for him. Then I entered the Race Across America, RAM, and in 2010, and did not finish. I was a did not finish. I had to stop after 750 miles. I went back the next year, race across the West, which is from Oceanside to Durango, 860 miles. Did that. And I'm waiting to win the lottery so I can go back and try RAM again because it's a pricey endeavor. I have a YouTube video. It's about 20 minutes and it's called Challenge by Choice. And it's a little thing I put together. I always loved the movie Yes Man with Jim Carrey. He was not living life. He had given up. He was just depressed, wouldn't go out with his friends, hated his job. And he went to this self-help conference. He got convinced to say yes to everything. And all at once his life changed. And mostly to the better. Now I like that story, but I said, no, you got to be careful. You can't say yes to everything. And it was a comedy, it's fiction. But if there's something in your heart, when I was a kid and I wanted to go to that running camp, nobody could have said, we want you to go to this camp. I think, it had to be, it's internal driven. When I made that transition to cycling, it's because I was looking, I hate to say, compared to a drug, I couldn't get an illegal drug. I could get a different illegal drug. Now, that's a bad metaphor perhaps to use, but it was a substitute that satisfied that craving that I had. And I started with a clean slate, Matthew. As a cyclist, I didn't have to live up to my old cycling self. As a runner, I found myself comparing myself to my old running self. And that was a
Right.
struggle for me. I've heard it's a struggle for a lot of runners, and there's one guy it's not a struggle for, Dick Beardsley. The minute he retired from professional running, he didn't quit running and he didn't quit racing. He just said, I'm not doing it as a vocation. This is not my number one thing in life anymore. It was for a period of time. But when he said that because of injuries and what have you, circumstances, I'm done with that now. I'm going to live a happy life doing what I like to do, run. And yes, I will occasionally go to a race and see how well I can do against my fellow competitors. I've never heard him complain about his performance being so subpar or no, he says, I did the best I could on the day. Who can ask for anything more? And I find that, I don't know what, something appealing to me that if we could get to that point where you're satisfied with you, not what anybody else thinks, but you're the only person you need to satisfy. So that transition really was to cycling, which carries on to this day. I don't pin on numbers anymore. I used to race competitively with the bike because I'm 66 years old, 66 and a half, just started Social Security. And I found that I'm enjoying it more and more just for the aesthetics, just for the fresh air, just for the scenery. I push myself as hard as I want or not. Where when you're training, there was no or not. You really had to almost focus, unless it was a recovery day, then it was a forced easy day. Now there's no monkey on my back. How's that sound? And it's
Yeah.
relief. I don't
Yeah.
know if it makes any sense, but
Everybody has to go through these passages, and these
yeah.
passages are fairly certainly unavoidable for us all. If you live long enough and have been a runner through the 70s and a competitive athlete,
Wow.
these things are in your future if you haven't gone through them, and they can be obstacles, hurdles, learning experiences, roadblocks, and everything else. So you've done a great job. You're self-aware. You're a gregarious person. It's great to talk to you. Hopefully, the small audience for this podcast is mostly runners. They'll find out about your podcast and can join in and hear more of your tales and hear directly from Beardsley and some of the people certainly who have been on this podcast have been in those races with you. There's a bunch of Division II
Mhm.
runners from out east that were in the same races, and
Yep.
they'll relate to that
Thank
too. So it was great talking to
Oh,
you.
thank you, man. Then I'm
My,
gonna reciprocate. You're gonna be on our website too. I'm gonna link your website.
my personal running story is so short, and it had quite a long gap. When I turned 60 and ran the steeplechase and won the Ontario Championship, but I'm pretty sure that's because there were so few entrants at age 60 willing to go over barriers that I had a kind of an easy
You
time.
know, we all say about steeplechasers, don't you? They eventually all end up singing soprano. Anyway, I'm sorry.
Well, unless you get out
Early
soon
enough.
enough. I've met up online with the guy who Waddle beat, the Russian
Oh,
guy.
wow. They had dove across the line.
Yevgeny Arsenov. I was trying to say, Let's talk." And he said, "Oh, I can't talk. My life's a disaster." And he showed me a video. His house has been blown up. He's a Ukrainian. So he
Oh,
was outside Kiev. His village is blown up. So I did a GoFundMe I'm just trying to get a little bit of money
that's
for him.
wow.
And I said, I want me to get Dave Waddle to put a testimony." I said, "No, don't bother him. This is my problem." I said, "If I give you some money, will you take it?" He said, "Oh, yeah, if the
Sure.
runners want to give me some money, I'll take it, but don't be asking people. This
Yeah,
is my
okay.
problem." But pretty interesting guy.
Wow. That is
Uh,
amazing.
yeah.
I think you're doing a great job. Yeah, I'm gonna definitely go back and start watching some of the podcasts because I recognize a lot of the names.
Yeah. There's a couple of interesting ones in names you probably won't recognize, but I, I, I wonder if Beersley knows them. One guy's called Kerry Green.
Mm.
He went to IUP with me. He's from my hometown, so I met him just as I was gonna be a freshman going into Indiana, Pennsylvania. He could barely make the C team. He was a walk-on at IUP. He ran Boston under 3 hours in
Cool.
5 different decades.
Wow.
That's one of the more impressive athletic performances in the world. There are only maybe a handful of people that have ever done that on the planet.
Well, that's the
That
love of running. Never give up
but
on
he's a
yourself. Sam
yeah.
Baer, did I see his name? Did you interview Sam?
Sam Bear's a yeah, he's fun to talk to. He was banned for professionalism for 5 years by the AAU. He was the one they made the case out of. He took 1,500 bucks maybe in Charleston or somewhere,
Oh,
and he was banned. He had to take his number off and bail out right before the finish line to run races.
Dick and I talk about that because it was such a joke. Bill Rogers and the guy, he mentions he got $10,000 to come around New York in 82 when he was injured. And he said, and this is our last podcast we did. He goes, Mike, I did it for the money. My
Oh,
kidneys,
yeah.
but he thought I was young. It'll be okay. He just ran 2:08 that April. And he said, when they waived it and just show up, here's $10,000. Hey, that was still against the rules, but they all turned a blind eye. Everybody knew what was going on. But back in the 60s, poor Sam Baer was a victim of bureaucracy. I guess. I once took
He was just
$300 to go to a race. So I'm a perfect, that's the most I
yeah.
ever got. Dick tells a story about him and Bill Rogers went to Stockholm and ran a marathon. And Bill won it. Dick got second. And Dick got $12,000 in $120 bills. That's a thick envelope of $100 bills. And Bill got more than that. And it's on one of our podcasts. Bill said, Dick, don't declare the money because then there's a record of it and they're going to want to tax you for it. Dick goes, I'm so naive. What if I go through customs and they say, do you have anything you want to declare? And you say no. And they go, they can
Yeah.
search you. They can search your wallet. He had taped the money inside of his legs, he said. And listen, okay,
Now he's
a
looking
drug
like a
dealer.
drug deal.
This is
Oh my god.
1981, they're 82. And he goes, his wife was with him, and he said up ahead of him, they could see an Asian guy getting the third degree being bodily searched. And Dick said, Barry, I can't do it. He left. He went to a bathroom. He said, I'm in there stripping all this tape off and money. He said, I walked up there and he said, I declared every freaking cent. I don't want to do this. I don't want to knowingly do, if you plead ignorance, that's not a good excuse. And when you're
Well,
hiding it,
you
it
know,
doesn't look like ignorance to me.
tape on your belly is not accidental.
I
No.
just think that, but those are the fun stories because now they can laugh about it and people talk about it. Talking about the drug use, Lance Armstrong passed 500 drug tests. And I tried to believe the story. And then he finally just had to fess up because all of his teammates fessed up because they all were being put under the thumb by the federal government, which is pretty serious business. And they all said, we did it. And so did he. We did it. And so he had about 10 or 12 teammates and all said, Lance was in on it. We all know that. Everybody knows it. And he finally went on Oprah and admitted it. And he'd go, damn it. Can't, the innocence is dead.
I was at the Sydney Olympics. I was in Cairo. I had been writing for PC World just as a side gig, and I bluffed my way and I ended up getting a press pass.
Good for you.
So I stood in front of Marion Jones,
Ooh.
and it was hard not to believe. She was just, no drugs, never. I would not do that. Even more so for my experience than Lance Armstrong. And it's just, oh my God.
Flo Joe.
People can lie.
Oh,
You
it's
have
okay.
to convince yourself that you're play a role, and people
If
can be
everybody's
good
doing it,
actors.
it's the attitude. Everybody's doing it. So I'm just part of it. I'm not doing anything nobody else is doing. So why should I be the martyr? Lance Armstrong said, I could have not done it and just not been a professional cyclist. And you go,
Yeah.
that's true. Dick and I have talked about it. I'm glad I never was given the opportunity. Frank Schroeder had that quote. If they proved that eating horse manure made you a faster runner, there'd be a line of skinny little guys outside the stable with plates in their hand the next day. But you'll find a way to justify it. I never had that. I never had to do that.
I talked to people that said, I've thought about that and said, if somebody said, I can give you a shot and
Yeah.
you will recover faster and you will run faster, and anybody who wants it can get this shot, people said they would have done it. And there are other athletes at big major Division I schools that talked about it and said, The weight guys were all taking
Oh,
pills.
it's rampant.
But we all knew you wouldn't go to the coach, but if you went to an assistant coach or trainer, you could get pretty much any pharmaceutically made product that you wanted to try.
We could go on, Matthew. You and I think this is the beauty of what you're doing, and maybe what Dick and I are doing. There's a whole group of us. I don't know if we call it the grain of America that still remember the 70s and the 80s. What's so sad
Yeah.
is this younger generation. I mentioned the name Dick Beardsley, or I'm not kidding. Now, Frank Shorter, it's very unusual, but you'll get people go, who's that? They're 25 years old and you want to go, excuse me, you don't know who Bill Rogers or Dick Beardsley? No, don't think I ever heard of him. And you're a runner. And Dick said he used to get tons and tons of invitations to come speak at a race, spaghetti dinner, come speak. They love to hear from you guys. And Frank and Bill said the same thing. They're not getting the calls anymore because the younger generation go, I don't know who these people are. Matthew, I better go.
Okay.
Thank you. Well, let's stay in contact.
That was Mike Dunlap, runner, marathoner, cyclist, and now podcast host with Dick Beardsley. Check out their show, On the Run with Beards and Dunn. I hope you enjoyed another episode of Running in the 70s. Voices, stories, and memories of athletes who were running in the 70s. Until next time, wherever you are, keep looking forward and don't forget to look back.